The Last of Us, the perennial game of the last generation. Garnering well over 200 Game of the Year awards and accolades, The Last of Us will be remembered for years, possibly decades even, in the same vein as other high watermarks in the medium. Games like Shadow of the Colossus, Super Mario 64, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, and Half-Life 2, among others. But is all that hype and adoration really justified? After a very brief prologue which shall not be spoiled for those yet to have played the game, it jumps ahead 20 years. A rare fungal infection known as the cordyceps, which is a very real infection that exists in the animal kingdom today, mutates to eradicate human life. There are only two ways to become infected: exposure to airborne spores or being bitten by another infected. It doesn't waste any time setting up too much about the origins of the outbreak, instead focusing on the aftermath and the harsh realities that set in after humans are exposed to such disease and destruction. By using a real-world basis for its infection, and keeping its sights set on telling a story about two people and the relationship that develops between them, The Last of Us never becomes bogged down by unnecessary filler or lore, setting the groundwork for one of the most touching and personal stories in a video game. Joel is tasked with taking Ellie, a 14-year-old girl from Boston, to a Firefly hospital out west by the leader of the Fireflies, a rebel group of sorts that fights against the military's restrictions and unlawful behavior. Joel and Ellie don't take an immediate liking to each other. Both he and the player are introduced to Ellie with a blank slate, allowing them to experience the relationship as it develops from the same viewpoint. The level of talent on display here is second to none in the industry. Nearly every character that makes an appearance on screen delivers his or her own lines naturally, due in no small part to the excellent script written by Neil Druckmann. This isn't very grand or epic writing with verbose vocabulary and inner monologues. This is a very simple script, but it also perfectly encapsulates the way any normal human being would speak. Everyone, even the more archetypal characters, feel very human, lending a much greater sense of gravity in moment-to-moment situations. The Last of Us is capable of hitting some very harsh, low emotional moments.
Mentioned that it was someplace out west.
What are we doing here? This is not us.
What do you know about us? About me?
I know that you are smarter than this.
Really? Guess what? We're shitty people, Joel. It's been that way for a long time.
No, we are survivors.
This is our chance.
It is over, Tess!
While also taking a step back to revel in the mundane, creating a juxtaposition between two different ends of the emotional spectrum, meshing them together in such a way that they complement each other for a much greater sense of depth.
You know what? This isn't that bad.
Why don't you try to get some sleep? All right.
I'm not even tired.
Every character, every line, every detail serves a purpose, and it is thanks to this unabashed sense of confidence in the player's own intelligence and foresight that The Last of Us excels. Optional contextual conversations exist for players to choose to engage in them, and for those that do, they'll hit a lot of the most effective emotional notes.
Oh, creepy. Guess they took the easy way out, huh?
Well, it ain't easy. For many, it was better than letting a clicker or a hunter do it for them. Trust me, it ain't easy.
Now, of course, all of these emotionally riveting and heightened scenes of drama would mean nothing if the gameplay became too detached from its cinematics. Fortunately, Naughty Dog has been honing the art of purposeful gameplay and gameplay mechanics over the past several years. Take, for example, the game's puzzles, if they can even be called that. There exist only two real puzzle types that repeat throughout the roughly 12-hour adventure over and over and over again. Joel must either pick up a ladder and place it somewhere else, or use a wooden pallet to move Ellie across a body of water. On the surface, it may seem like an incredibly mundane and outright poor game design decision, but then this happened.
I know. Step on the fucking pallet.
That moment is when everything clicked for me, and I realized the sheer brilliance of what Naughty Dog had achieved. In creating gameplay mechanics and encounters that are fully grounded in reality and could exist within the rules and parameters of the game's universe and tone, this whole debate about ludonarrative dissonance becomes a complete non-issue. The Last of Us crafts a solution to the problem most major AAA games have, in that the cinematics are all very well acted, directed, and even very well written, but any gameplay interspersed between each seems to exist in an entirely separate universe. The best example of this would be Mass Effect 2. It is a very good game, and despite what I'm about to say, it's still one of the better told stories in the medium, but it holds one very glaring deficiency that ruins any immersion it tries to set. It tries so hard to develop all these characters and this rich universe that it falls apart once the incredibly generic and linear cover-based shooter level design, with waves of spawning enemies and waist-high barriers everywhere that make no architectural sense, takes center stage in missions. It does a poor job of trying to make any level feel organic whatsoever, completely ruining the impact of any emotional scene that may have taken place before that. Fortunately, The Last of Us doesn't have that problem. Each mechanic was built with a purpose, and that, perhaps most of all, is the game's greatest strength. The Last of Us is primarily a stealth game, allowing players to use a listen mode on all difficulties but Survivor and Grounded. Patience and diversion is key here, with bottles and bricks strewn about carefully across levels to avoid confrontation or even gain an advantageous position for a stealth takedown. However, once you are spotted, and you will be spotted, you'll be equipped to take enemies out. The arsenal includes weapons such as a shotgun, a standard sidearm, a bow, a rifle, and a flamethrower. Each weapon can be upgraded at specific stations using supplies found lying about. Crafting materials can also be found in the game world to craft things such as a smoke bomb, Molotov cocktail, or a medkit. Even supplements can be found to upgrade Joel's abilities such as his health. Ammo and resources are plentiful enough to feel comforting on the normal difficulty setting, so it's probably best to play on hard for the most well-balanced and enjoyable experience. Combat in The Last of Us is both daunting and exciting, dreadful and enjoyable. Once Joel's enemies become aware of his presence, it becomes less about survival and more about using this leveraging of power. Have you been discovered? Maybe throw a smoke bomb and run somewhere else to throw off your adversaries, and then pick up a brick or a bottle, use that to draw one enemy out, then use him as a body shield to intimidate everyone else. Stick in the open too long and suddenly enemies will have the advantage with their numbers and accuracy. Then, it becomes quickly about calculating the best way to use resources available to leverage that power again in your favor. Encounters never remain one-sided for too long, always seesawing back and forth dramatically in the blink of an eye, allowing for some very, very intense exchanges. Melee combat itself is very simple. All you do is mash on the square button repeatedly, and maybe occasionally press triangle when a prompt shows up to push an especially vicarious infected or soldier back a bit. It may sound boring, but the tactile feedback that comes from the up-close and shoddy camera work, mixed with the excellent contextual animation, makes every single hit feel satisfying and much more violent than it actually is. The Last of Us is a game that revels in its dark and morose tone, never veering too far into hyper-violent territory. Fortunately, once the single player is done, it also includes a very good multiplayer that honestly does not get the credit it deserves. It's a bit bare bones compared to other contemporary releases nowadays, like your Call of Duty or whatever multiplayer game you play, Battlefield, but it is also the most unique multiplayer experience you can get nowadays. The Last of Us is one of the greatest games of the past generation. And although not everyone may enjoy the game personally on a personal level, no one can deny the amount of craftsmanship that has gone into making the game, and for that alone, it will be remembered for years to come.